Hello everyone, my name is Kenneth Martin, host of the Hard Tack Talks podcast. I'm joined today by Chris Cockburn. Hi Chris.
Hi Kenny.
Chris, Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, and you.
Yeah.
Who would think we're in 2026 already?
2026, cannot believe it. It's just 2025 has gone by so fast, January 2026 will be Christmas 2026 before we know it.
Too right.
Absolutely. So Chris, you're the business development manager at Let It
Yep,
in Glasgow.
that's right.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us a wee bit about how you got involved in the industry and also how you got involved in the role?
Well,
just now?
it's one of these ones where it was pretty much an accident. I'm an accidental letting agent, really. So it began, 2026 will actually mark my 21st year in August 2026
Right.
with the company. But it all began when I was a tenant many years ago with Let It. In a flat in the early 2000s, and just got to know the company then.
Mm-hmm.
I was at uni at the time studying music, so nothing to do with property or anything like that. And then, but just once I'd graduated and I was kind of treading water to decide what I wanted to really do with my life,
Mm-hmm.
I got a seasonal job doing viewings
Mm-hmm.
for Let It. And back then it was the buy-to-let boom days, and the company was growing, and it became a space for me to take on more of a proper role in the company
Mm-hmm.
back then. And the role just evolved from there to what it is today,
Right.
which is where I'm the guy who goes out, meets landlords as the face of the company, advises would-be landlords or existing landlords on the compliance aspects in an ever-changing landscape, and make sure that their properties presented well on the market, and shows the best account of itself in terms of how they should present it from an aesthetic point of view, compliance point of view, and then obviously it's the baton's passed over to us to bring the place to life and make sure that it's looking good in the listing.
Excellent. Okay. Well, 2025 was quite a year in terms of the housing market.
That's right.
I suppose every year is quite a year. There's always challenges coming along. Tell us a wee bit about what's happened then in 2025 in the housing market for you.
Well, 2025, I think, will probably go down as the year that marked the introduction of the new housing bill in Scotland, which has pretty much marked the end of a whole long period of uncertainty and changes and restrictions and things which have unsettled the sector, and landlords generally have felt that has been a challenge, and the private rented sector as a whole has been a less cheery place than say 10 years ago. And what with the unknowns that were always around the corner, I guess it's always a good thing to have some stability. And in 2025, we saw obviously the introduction of the new housing bill, which lays the playing field out for the sector going forward. So at least we can look ahead with a bit of certainty.
Right, okay. So I know you've got some stats in your book there, is there? Numbers you want to share with us?
That's right. So it's really just to state that obviously the bill completed stage 3 in the end of September 25. Leaving Royal Assent is the final step before it becomes law. The legislation itself is going to provide a framework for rent control, fresh rights for tenants to keep pets, and stronger tools to combat homelessness. But most of the key measures require further consultation, meaning agents and landlords are unlikely to see actual rent controls as outlined until ahead to 2028 in actual reality. But according to the Scottish Association of Landlords, SAL, 53% of landlords plan to leave the sector due to rent control proposals and general kind of hostility, if you like, towards landlords. That's a challenge. That's a challenge that we face. We're facing a shrinking sector. The report shows that across Scotland, 52,000 homes, which is about just under 15% of the 350,000 properties in the sector on the landlord register database, could have been lost over the last 2 years.
Right.
And in the survey that was carried out by SAL, landlords were asked how they intend to go about withdrawing the properties. Sadly, most of them, 43% of them, are going to serve notice on existing tenants and then place that property on the open market. 27% have said that they're going to wait until the property is vacant, and 30% will sell to another investor, landlord, with a tenant in place. And more than half of the landlords raised rents due to rent controls. So the whole kind of meddling in the area of rent controls has only ironically served to increase rents overall, because it's introduced a supply and demand situation where landlords have withdrawn their properties from the sector, meaning that there's fewer properties to go about, and therefore rents are more expensive because there's many would-be tenants fighting over fewer properties. So that's led to that dynamic. Is it a healthy dynamic? No. It's I would agree that rents are too high, but it's how we combat the solution. And I think it's that old thing of kind of career politicians meddling in housing policy, and any other policy for that matter, tends to have a poor outcome because they generally don't look at the whole overall thing in the round. So it would be far better if they looked at the investability of the sector, injected more sensibility, more properties into the sector, removed the disincentives for being in the sector and introduced incentives for being in the sector. And if more landlords and more residential properties appeared in the sector, then that would have a natural calming effect of high rents or rents rocketing up. So that's a kind of important key takeaway that I wish politicians would listen to the industry experts and take that on board and action that, because the private rented sector is we're in a housing crisis, and a large component of that housing crisis is the lack of new homes being built for people and the lack of social housing. So they've got a resource there. They've got the tools of the private rented sector. They've got they've got however many hundreds of 350,000 properties that could be part of that solution. In housing people. So it's a tool that they could call upon, but instead, there's a bit of demonization. But that's all a bit negative so far. I always like to think that there's always a flip side to everything. And the flip side is, the more regulation is, I suppose, there will be more of a perception that the private rented sector is safe and well governed. And if there's stability and a bit more investability, then I think it will be good for tenants in the long run as well, because landlords and letting agents will be held accountable to making sure that the homes are safe and attractive and fit for purpose.
Yeah, well, and as it should be, I do think everyone has the right to, whether you're buying a new home or a home, or renting, you've got the right to have something that's warm and of quality, dry, doesn't have damp and rot and all the things, the negative things that I guess are portrayed against industry. But it's not necessarily, it's not everyone in the industry. You hear the worst case scenarios, But if there's I think it was 150,000 houses, 150,000 houses you mentioned would maybe be coming out the sector, is that right?
Around 52,000.
52,000, right. So 52,000, but in real terms though, those houses don't disappear.
No.
They are kind of just repurposed or maybe sold into the private market.
Correct. And that's not to say that there are not motivated buy-to-let investor landlords out there. But it's becoming such a landscape that it's going to be better if you do that as a company, as a limited company, and have multiple properties. There's also the other disincentive of the 8% additional dwelling tax levied to second homes in Scotland as well. And obviously once you get over 6, it becomes a lot more cost effective because that's nullified. So if you're a kind of very geared up motivated investor landlord, then it might see a shift more towards the makeup of the landlord landscape being more geared towards that sort of individual.
Right. So are you kind of seeing that just now in the business? And I say that because I've got some properties that we run as serviced accommodation units, but I personally have never been attracted to the rental market.
Yep.
Rightly or wrongly, I've always thought, you put a property out, okay, you maybe not go on a full repayment mortgage, but you're doing an interest-only mortgage. But by the time, you've had a tenant in there, maybe been a great tenant, but been in for 10, 15 years, place needs repainted, new kitchens, new bathrooms, and all of a sudden, it's a pension game as opposed to necessarily making profit that you could live off on a monthly basis, and that's always been my thoughts on it. But I don't know if that's something. Am I right? Am I wrong? Or
to a point, yeah. I mean, it depends how you're geared up financially, and everybody's situation will be different from the next person. I think gone are the days of, back when I started. I'm lucky in my 20 years in the industry. I've seen different phases, if you like, in the PRS. Where when I began, the buy-to-let boom days were here, and you could easily get 105, 100 and whatever it was % mortgage to chuck a furniture pack in, and then you knew for certain that property was going to rapidly appreciate, and so it was fair thing to do to just take out a massive mortgage on it and not worry about it, just do interest only. And back then, incidentally as well, there weren't all the certification requirements that some find onerous that are in place now. Not necessarily saying they're a bad thing, but that was how it was then. These days, if you're doing that, you're sailing far too close to the wind, and then you risk. Since then, we've obviously had the financial crash in the late 2000s. We've got fluctuating landscape of these mixed messages that we spoke about earlier with regard to rent controls and such like, making the future uncertain. And so landlords would probably, that's all these little factors are kind of combining together to make landlords nervous probably about the private rented sector being a kind of place to be for the future. Hence why there was an attraction towards short-term holiday letting because of the cash flow attraction to it. But if you're geared up well, it's a long-term investment. It's bricks and mortar. It's not going anywhere. You're providing a home for someone. And I think as long as you make part of our job is to make sure that the whole investment runs efficiently as possible by ensuring that it's all certified correctly, but more than that, that it's robust and attractive. And if it starts looking a bit dog-eared here and there between tenancies, we always advise our landlords to invest further in the property, set the bar as high as possible, because then if you do that, the tenants look after the place longer, better for longer, and you'll get a longer, healthier tenant out of it. And then that tenant will be proud, to call it their home. And I always think as well of the short-term holiday let being, although it's a property investment, I think of that more as akin to the hospitality sector rather than actual housing as such.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's...
And we don't incidentally take to do with holiday lets. It's not our bag. Some letting agents do. We focus purely on the kind of long-term private rented sector.
Yeah. No, I get it. I get the difference. My wife's got a service accommodation business, like managing somewhere in the region of 70 service accommodation units. So it's definitely a hospitality business, and it's definitely 24/7, 365 days a year. It's a hotel spread out throughout Lanarkshire and Glasgow that needs to get managed. And I don't know if I could do that, but everybody.
At the end of the day, the thing I enjoy about what I do in my role in property is the capturing of properties and doing property photography, video tours and floor plans. I like to set our stall out, if you like, on the property portals as slickly as we can. So as far as that goes, I am familiar with your good wife, and she's had me do property photo shoots for some of her properties that she looks after. So at the end of the day, it's still a room to photograph well. So that's the bit I enjoy.
Good, excellent. So Glasgow, as an architect's practice, we're on the suburbs of Glasgow.
Yep.
but we understand there's big changes afoot in there, in part maybe driven by the housing crisis, but maybe also policies in Glasgow. So we've seen, an uprise, in my opinion, in serviced accommodation in the town centre. We've seen hotel provisions in terms of plan applications on the increase as well. Student accommodation. What I'm trying to say is the planning department policies seem to be driving, if you like, uses that could have been used in standard mainstream housing out of that housing, and into their own facilities.
Yep.
So are you seeing any release then of housing in Glasgow for letting or for purchase, or do you think it's still quite stagnant? Or
I think it's fairly stagnant. I think landlords exiting the sector, those properties that are going into the open market, might find themselves being snapped up by first-time buyers,
Right.
Or other more motivated kind of larger scale investor purchasers. In which case, we can still bring our services to the table. But in terms of like the construction and so on that's going on in the city, I was stuck in traffic yesterday in Charing Cross in Glasgow, and I looked across over towards like the sort of Elmbank Street sort of area, and there's massive construction going on there, and it looks like it's student accommodation, and it's like massive construction projects, and it's not an area we really get involved in, but it's certainly a big slice of the accommodation market and the student accommodation market in Glasgow, which used to be a big part of our tenant makeup.
Yeah, because it was the whole thing, you'd take in a tenement flat and you'd have 3 or 4 students, HMO style, and I know the council have kind of tried to eradicate that by introducing bespoke design student accommodation. I do wonder though if it's all going a bit saturated. I mean, you see these apartments going up left, right, and centre.
And they're all very fancy, right enough, but they're also really, really expensive.
Absolutely,
and, in terms of the competitive proposition, it actually is such that they're so fancy and so expensive that we're still, the private rented sector, when I say we, is still an attractive option for tenant, for student tenants.
So you've got students who are actually letting from you as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, plenty, because I think there's an attraction in having your own place that's frankly cheaper than some of the bells and whistles type bespoke student accommodation. So
it's interesting that when my daughter, she went to Glasgow in the end up, but we took her up to Aberdeen and also Dundee, and as you say, the price, £750, £800. I think Edinburgh was £1,000, for a room for a month, and you just think, wow, and clearly students are paying this, but I don't know if it's funded or if it's foreign students that are, maybe families and parents they get burst. I don't know how it works, but it's a lot of money, and I can see why developers of student accommodation would probably want to get into that marketplace, because in theory they should be making good money from it.
Certainly it's a key part of the accommodation makeup in cities where there are predominant a lot of universities.
A few things. And what have you got any experience of the build to rent market? And I say that because with the housing crisis I keep saying this housing crisis, I don't know whether the government's actually taking it seriously enough or not, but everyone at the ground level, grassroots level, talks about it and understands that it's here. So there's rumours, if you like, believe them or not, that a lot of the big corporates, the banks, are now starting to look at funding into the market with producing mass housing, and looking at the kind of build to rent market. Are you seeing any signs of that? Have you got investors who are tapping into those conversations?
It's not something that we have a touch point on it really at the moment. That's a little niche of the private rented sector, which is very bespoke and geared up for the whole machine to be part of, from the lender downwards, managed. But there's still, I believe, space for experienced property managers and letting agents to play a part in looking after the actual nitty gritty of these units, these properties. I always like to think of what we do as a very unglamorous nuts and bolts type service. Not the flush marketing, not the glory side of the investment. Just really dealing with repair issues, handling regular inspections, doing check-ins, check-outs of tenancies, and that all needs to be done effectively. So that's really where our expertise is.
Excellent. Okay. So we've got a kind of understanding of Let It, and obviously an understanding of the kind of marketplace and what's happening in Glasgow. The premise of the Hard Talks podcast is really to try and dive a bit deeper into what's the big issue, what's the big burning issue. It might be something for 2025, might be something you see coming ahead 2026, 2027, but in terms of the letting industry, what's the big challenges you think that you are currently facing or about to face in terms of sustaining that sector and maybe even helping towards the housing crisis?
Yeah, I think that the big challenge is, and it's been the way for probably 2020, 2021 now, just as we were emerging out of COVID, is the reduction in the overall stock.
Right.
That's definitely a challenge, and landlords exiting the sector.
Right.
But that said, if you were to start a letting agent up today, you would grow because there is appetite to invest in buy-to-let property. But I think if you like us, we grew the most 20 years ago, and we're now 20 years on, whereby those landlords that were buy-to-let investors back when it was different are now also 20 years older, and they're thinking of basically cashing in their investments to go and enjoy their retirement. So we're kind of got a symptom of that going on as well.
Right.
So it's really a case of trying to replenish that stock, trying to develop new relationships with new landlords to take on some of the existing stock that we have. So that's a challenge as well, and trying to ensure that tenants aren't left high and dry and have to move out and go and find somewhere afresh at a higher market rent, is to try and find just a landlord to replace their outgoing landlord. So that's something that we successfully achieve.
Right.
And it's always satisfying when that happens. But that's I don't know if that quite answered your question.
Yeah, no, I think if it's the housing stock that's the issue, it is back to the housing question. But I do know a few, I'm going to say accidental landlords, people who've, family members have passed away, and probably as opposed to selling the property, they thought, oh, we'll just keep that, and I think they find it tough. I think if you're not going at it thinking I want to do this as a proper business, and you're gifted.
That's where our job comes in, though, to try and kind of give them all the information that they need, and take the worry away from them. So that's why it's quite an interesting type of investment, residential property, because it's unique in that it involves a third party in the shape of a tenant to allow the whole investment plan to work. And that tenant's a stranger, they're an unknown. Obviously, there's due diligence on them and the referencing and such like, but that makes it quite an interesting type of investment. So it's very much a people business, and not just the tenant that you put in, that we have to have an ongoing relationship with, and provide a buffer between the tenant and the landlord, but also that the landlords themselves are all people, they're all different, they all have different attitudes to the presentation of their property, the upkeep of maintenance, the long-term goal for that investment, whether they're an accidental landlord or they're a more seasoned, motivated buy-to-let investor. It always requires a different conversation from my side, as to kind of, a lot of them, the accidental ones, do need some more hand-holding and kind of coaching through what their obligations are as a landlord, and what they should do to present the property, and what they need to do, and what the risks can be, and how we can minimise the risks. So some of them are more predisposed to, they have a better temperament for lending themselves to being a landlord than other people. So it's an interesting conversation all the time.
Yeah, I think there's a kind of mindset thing there as well about it, because essentially it is a business, and there's a mindset thing there as well. I've got two friends, both of which was accidental, both inherited their parents' properties. One of my friends has still got it, but then suffers from the tax, increase in terms of right, because you no longer get the interest, and there's a name for that, and I forget what it is at this moment in time. But my other friend inherited his family home as well, and he had a kind of sense of guilt, I suppose, about how, because he knew the neighbours either side, and it's that thing of how are they looking after the property, are they causing issues in it, and I think in the end up it was easier for him to sleep at night selling the property on.
Yeah, some landlords are terrified of what the tenant might do to their neighbours.
Or
not
I'm saying anything was going on, but it's one of those. It's the thought of it, I think.
Yeah. So that's a very common thing.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, I've been there myself. I rented out property whereby a property that I lived in a few years ago, and I was always worried about the wee lady downstairs. But it turned out we got two great tenants that lasted a good couple of years each. So perfect, nothing to worry about in the end.
No, that's it. I think, we've got some properties that we own ourselves as serviced accommodation, and me and Sandra often joke about how little we are in the properties, because if you went in them too much to look at things with too much of a critical eye, or get to know the neighbours or what have you. It's not that we're trying to do anything that annoys neighbours. Of course we're not, and if there's any issues, we'd fix them. But you don't want to get too involved in knowing neighbours when it comes to in my opinion, when it comes to these things, because all of a sudden you are the person to pick up the phone to constantly.
You want to keep a little bit arm's length.
And
that's what we do.
Yeah.
We are. We occasionally have to mediate, and there's always the odd occasion where a neighbour either is not the easiest neighbour themselves, or even our tenants occasionally have caused issues, and that we have to go and make sure the tenants are aware of what they should be doing to with a view to being a nice neighbour and stuff.
Yeah, it does.
Yep.
So have you got any radical thoughts then, or if you had a magic wand, how would you increase the housing stock in the
reduce the additional dwelling tax?
Reduce additional
or abolish it altogether.
So for those who are listening, maybe in for the first time, looking to get involved in the market, can you explain what that is for them?
So 8% is the fee you have to pay on the completion of a second home purchase.
Yeah.
So that's a few thousand there, and then for just buying it. So if that's an obstacle, if that was removed, keener interest rates, obviously that's a wider economical issue, that would help as well.
Right.
If lending was easier to come by for the purpose of a second buy-to-let home. I think greater regulation is welcomed in terms of, from my side, just demonstrating that the private rented sector is a dependable place to be from a tenant's perspective. So we're already going down that path already. But one big bugbear of issue that has hung over landlords has been rent control issues, or proposals surrounding rent controls, or actual rent controls which have been in place. There was a whole ban on rent increases for a few years post-COVID that got incrementally reduced. And the new proposal has further rent controls and rent control zones, as they're going to be called. But it's worth stressing and pointing out that actually there has been that mechanism available to councils and housing ministers already, even with the advent of the private residential tenancy a number of years ago. There's that mechanism. It already existed, whereby they could apply a rent pressure zone, but it was never enacted. It was a tool that was never used. So one has to wonder whether they will be implemented this time, or if they'll be implemented willy-nilly. Trigger happy with that, and then that will only surely serve to disincentivize landlords further. So as long as that's sensibly implemented, obviously the mechanism is so the bill now states that in any designated rent control area, the annual increases will be capped at CPI plus 1% up to a maximum of 6%.
Right.
So it's a break on rather than a ban, if you think of it like that. I think landlords need to not get too panicked about the advent or the soundbite of rent controls or rent caps, because, like I say, there's been that mechanism previously. Rents are keener than they've ever been. So I think, we just need to let this period of stability play out, and hopefully that'll allow some more perception of investability in the sector.
Yeah, but I wonder how long the stability thing's going to take, because I think I seen something that suggested that potentially the inflation was starting to stabilise or come down the way. But there's a cost of living crisis. This thing we hear is cost of living crisis. And I get that it's here, and I get that some people can't afford things, and I get there's some of us that are a wee bit more lucky and can afford, other luxuries in life. I remember I watched something on I think it was YouTube or something like that, and it was an older gentleman, pensioner age, and he said, "There's not such thing as a cost of living crisis. It's just how you decide to spend your money." And he was reflecting back to just after the war, where his generation had to look after every penny. They had a jacket and a pair of shoes, and they looked after it and they kept it well. And the person who was interviewing was there with brand new designer Nike on, £1,000 phone.
I call that the have it all generation.
Yeah.
Or that's a very philosophical attitude that chap took, and for sure there's the have it all philosophy where people just must have the best of everything and the latest, and it's part of it. It must be, we're maybe gonna go down a rabbit hole if we start going down that chat, but it's part of that whole throwaway economy, because something isn't the newest or the best. You get that, but then the rent's too expensive. Now, I'm not saying rents aren't too expensive. Rents are horrendously expensive. I'm not denying that. And the message from the rhetoric from all the kind of various tenant support groups and tenant union groups out there miss the point and think that landlords are nasty, horrible, greedy people who want to just fleece tenants for all they're worth, but that fails to recognise that landlords are also trying to run that as a business and have their own costs, and those costs are going up. And at the end of the day, the reason that, as we mentioned earlier, that the rents are going up is a supply and demand dynamic. So it's not just to do with random greediness, it's to do with the whole makeup, and it fails to recognise that the root of the problem is the housing ministers and likes of Mary McCallum not recognising that if they were just to make the PRS more investable, it would calm the whole thing down and make rents more affordable. It's like so simple when you look at it like that.
Seems to be, I don't know if there's a bigger agenda, but it seems to be something that's being missed across the board. We spoke about in previous podcasts about the housing crisis, and we've had a lot of construction professionals on talk about how do we get the new built housing market moving again. One of the big bottlenecks is planning, and I keep saying all of you spoke about regulation, maybe tap into that, but all of the regulation in terms of planning and building control, and the regulations that involve with Scottish Water to get houses on the site, etc., etc. All of those authorities, they've all got bureaucracy and regulation in place for the right reasons, as a result of accidents or things that's happened in the past, or key learning points that they've put regulation in place to fix that. The challenge that we see is it just takes far, far too long to negotiate through all of that bureaucracy and those regulations, to the extent that, you can put a planning application in, get a planning approval, and then take just as long to resolve the planning conditions before you can actually start on site. Sometimes to the extent that the planning application, which lasts for 3 years, is about to lapse, and you still haven't resolved the actual planning conditions. So regulation is something that in terms of new build housing is so difficult that I think it needs a radical approach. I.e., we're just not going to do that anymore. I'm not saying it's right. I'm going to pick on something like bat surveys. Now, I'm not saying it's right that I'm saying this, but it would take someone very brave to say we are no longer going to ask for BAT surveys, because all of a sudden that takes quite a significant amount of period off of the planning process.
Yep.
You know, you could say the same with flood risk assessments. Dangerous, I know, because things are going to flood, but it would take someone very brave at the top of the tree to say, in order to get new houses built, etc., we're no longer going to ask for flood risk assessments. Now, the opposite side of that is you build somewhere where we're prone to flooding, you know, which no one wants, which is why the policy is there in the first place. So it's a really difficult.
I guess they just have to kind of probably put some sort of think tank in place to identify the most costly bottlenecks and see what can be done to tackle those.
Absolutely.
But it's interesting as well. You're talking about regulation. That's Britain all over, isn't it? We like our checks and measures, and another bit of uncertainty is the surrounding my sector and the PRS is the what's going to happen with energy performance regulations. That is changing, and will there be a requirement for them to be a minimum C rating,
right?
Or will that, because that's been proposed previously and it's been kicked down the road multiple occasions. Will it happen again? Some landlords are worried. That they've told me worried about what the EPC is of this property and what we'll be able to do about it, and if it gets implemented. And I'm like, well, chances are it'll get kicked down the road again. It might not, but they're also changing the methodology of the assessing of the energy performance certificate as well. So again, that's a bit of an unknown there that's causing a bit of reticence.
Do you know or have any rough ideas, if you can share it, how many of the properties you manage actually have that banding already?
I don't have the figures to hand, but most of our properties are probably a D upwards, which they're going to need to be a C. And there's a large number of a C. I'll be able to find out, and you can maybe put it in the description or something like that later. But going forward, under these proposals of the requirement to be a C, there's all sorts of caveats along the way, and grants going to be available, and government loans to landlords to bring their property up to the required standard if they need to.
Right.
So these are all things that are, again, yet to be thrashed out fully.
Yeah. No, I guess it's good those grants and sets are there, but of course there'll be somebody that's saying, well, how are those going to be funded? Ultimately, it's the taxpayer and businesses, etc., that's funding all that stuff. And look, we've got to increase, or we've got to improve the fabric. Of course, we have. We need to do that, but it is costly. You know, when we're involved with working with old or historic buildings constantly now, because you know a lot of buildings are having to be repurposed, as we've seen. You know, coming out of COVID. We say that like we came out of war, but it was a world war essentially. You know, no one was fighting with each other. We were just fighting with COVID. But the fact that material prices etc. have gone up and haven't really come back down. Okay, maybe stabilised, but haven't come back down. But the cost to upgrade some of these buildings to and not just the cost, the inconvenience, because it is inconvenient. To go into a house and insulate it or upgrade windows, put on PV, particularly some of the council programmes where they're maybe doing streets and streets, and they're just, trying to keep tenants in there and do all this stuff at the same time. That is not an easy thing to live with. No. It's not an easy thing to live with. And it's quite challenging, I think, to understand. I don't think the layperson would necessarily understand just how difficult it can be.
The scale is incredible of the things to tackle surrounding housing generally, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, the private rented sector should be part of the solution and can provide homes and does need to be well run and provide attractive, safe, warm homes for people.
Excellent. Okay. So one of the things that's affecting us, and I don't know if it's affecting you guys or if you see glimmers of this coming, is about sustainability. So we've spoken about, maybe going up to C rating, but is there anything coming soon, or can you see anything on the horizon from any regulations whereby the properties you manage, we might need to make sure, for example, that renewables are being used, or another one was EV charging points or etc. for cars, because that's a big thing for us, the new build.
On the point of the boilers, first of all, I'm thinking about those, the gas boilers. It's a bit unclear as to whether obviously there's going to be a move away from natural gas, isn't there? So it's whether other solutions will be available for gas boilers to be repurposed, or whether it's more of a more attractive for somebody buying a rental property to buy one just with electric heating, and then what's the efficiency of that? If it's a new build, obviously we'll have solar. Strangely enough, we've never really encountered any stumbling blocks or much conversation surrounding EV charging, because a lot of the private rented sector is flatted accommodation anyway, so it's not really been an issue. We've got a few of this new portfolio that we're acquiring, which are family homes and likes of sort of Erskine and Bishopton sort of area that do have EV charging ports. But yeah, a lot of them are flatted accommodation. It doesn't really come up in conversation too much with a requirement from a tenant, for example.
So do you see that sometimes where tenants will say, I need an EV charging point?
Not very often.
No.
That's what I mean. It's not often
a requirement.
Something we get asked, to be honest.
Right, so. Okay. Interesting, actually, that it's not often. Yeah, I don't know where we're at with the whole EV thing. We're certainly being asked with new build properties now to make sure that there's, for example, a one-off house should have an EV charging point.
Yep.
But there's a kind of move now away from planned apartments, not asking you or not allowing you to put driveways in to new build houses. They want like car parking courts.
Right.
So then there's that thing of, well, allocation of car parking spaces, and then how do you put EV into that? So it seems there's always conflict, but it's probably an unintended consequence of let's move cars away from the front gardens and the sides of houses so that they're kind of hidden behind. But then that has knock-on consequences for EV, which is the big thing that, well, it may or may not arrive, but obviously there are more EV cars on the road, and probably carbon fuels are forecast to be disappearing. But it was interesting just to hear if it was affecting the letting market yet, because all of that stuff eventually, I think, whether it's just letting or whether it's older buildings and houses generally, everything was going to have to come up to some kind of standard,
Yeah, and I can well appreciate that our built environment is a key topic of policymakers, and how things look and how our environment is presented to as a picture. There's a house, there's a drive. Oh no, hang on, that means that there must be a car, and cars are bad. So there's that whole rhetoric that sort of shaping of our lived environment, that you guys must be having to navigate in terms of you'll have to enact kind of the will of the policymakers in terms of what our built environment should look like.
I think that's the thing I think probably the public don't even some developers don't understand yet just how difficult that is, because quite often policies conflict with each other. What one policy says is a direct conflict to something else, and you just, well, how do I make that work?
Cars are not bad, by the way. I was saying that tongue in cheek.
No, cars aren't bad. I think. Well, we'll go back to what we spoke about. I've got two daughters. Both one now has a car. Another daughter, my other daughter's come up behind, is looking to have a car. So all of a sudden, we're a 4-car household. Cost of living crisis. Realistically, would one do? Don't know, but it's back to that thing of it's a kind of throwaway generation. Not that you're going to throw a car away until it's absolutely necessary, but it's my kids' generation is brought up with. Don't mean getting anything that they want, because they're paid for their cars themselves, but it's knowing that in theory it's kind of affordable.
Yep.
They've got their part-time jobs, and with their part-time jobs they can afford, once they pay for the mobile phone right enough, but they can afford their car. So that's an interesting world.
Absolutely is.
Anything else in terms of the letting world just now that you want to talk about that we've maybe missed?
I don't think so.
No,
I think we've covered
it.
Covered probably enough that people want to hear.
Right, fair enough. Okay. So we usually finish off the podcast with a wee question from the last guest. And the last guest was actually myself just before Christmas when we did the roundup of 2025. So it's my privilege to offer you a question as we kick off into 2026. So the kind of question I'd like to ask you is and probably to think about, and I know you're not necessarily in the construction industry, you kind of sit in parallel at the side of it, but if you had a magic wand for what you know about the construction industry, is there one thing you'd like to fix? One thing you would like to fix that would maybe help?
Well, just going on our previous conversation, you alluded to a lot of roadblocks and bottlenecks in planning and that sort of thing. So I think a number of things, probably small things that get chucked your way that would make the acceleration of completing your projects and remove some bureaucracy would probably make your day, right? So that would aid the construction of homes, of other building projects, and boost the economy, I guess, because everything will happen and be here and be usable and be deployed, like roads and all sorts. Public infrastructure would happen and be ready sooner. So probably the removal of some unnecessary bureaucracy.
It's trying to find out who the person is that would make that decision.
Is that a good answer, by the way?
It was a good answer, yeah, but it's living it. It's trying to find out that one person who's prepared to put their neck above the parapet and make the decision, because it's not going to be an easy one. There's going to be loads of people who, if you take any level of bureaucracy out of that whole process, because it's all there for a reason, so they're going to be unpopular, and I think that might be one of the big problems.
I think it might take a bold political change of direction, but that's straying into dangerous territory, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we're not a political show, so we'll maybe leave that one for someone else. I'd love to get a politician or an MP or someone on to actually talk about their views on it, So if there's anyone listening and you want to come on, then do it. It wouldn't be a hard Piers Morgan style interview, It's just to try and
much worse.
Yeah, it's just to try and find out what your views are and try and gauge what's actually happening, 2026, 2027, because we hear loads of, drill baby drill. Let's make house building easier, etc., etc. But I just don't know if anything's filtering through. Seems to be loads of public consultations, etc. But it's still going to boil down to the fact that someone somewhere is going to have to make a hard-nosed decision about taking so many layers of this bureaucracy and regulation out of the playing field again.
I think that's a challenge that's present in all walks of life. It's not just construction, but I just feel that like over the last decade or so, we've just been there's been one thing after another in terms of some issue in the country that's been there to get overcome. Obviously the biggest being COVID, but there's education, there's immigration, there's all sorts of there's the green agendas, and there's all sorts of things on the agenda that I think just bog everything down. Maybe it's just maybe that's just always like that, and you just end up looking back with rose-tinted spectacles, don't you, over a number of years, and so it was easier back in the I don't know, the 90s or something, but then I'm sure that era had its challenges as well.
Yeah, I think, well, it's interesting. I'm thinking, I was at a funeral yesterday and I was with some elderly relatives. I'm talking, mid-80s. And they were talking about their generation, which was, if I get my sums right, my maths right, it was just before the Second World War. And their generation was referred to by the priest as the faithfuls. And not just faithful in terms of the religion, but faithful in terms of the belief in the system and authority. And that if they turned up every day and just did what they were supposed to do, the authority, would take care of everything else. And their remarks was that really the generations that we now have who are looking after, government and the youth of today don't quite have that faith, that they're not accountable to themselves. They're maybe looking, that's someone else's fault. That's their fault. And
that might be something to do with the social media age that we live in now, that everybody's got an opinion and everybody's got the ability to try and sway people's ideas.
Yeah, so, maybe.
People are maybe more rebellious now or less respectful than they used to be.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, so We don't know who the next guest is. I actually don't know who the next guest is either. Something we can start working on over the next couple of weeks. Would you like to leave a question for the next guest?
Question? Gosh, I wasn't expecting that. So, do you know what sort of set will it be to do with housing or construction?
I really don't know, but probably in construction.
Right, let's find out a generic one. Ask them, right? What is the thing that they are most positive about going forward for the next couple of years in their sector?
Oh, excellent.
And what will become easier?
Good. Yeah,
they must have something.
Yeah, very positive outlook there. Thanks for that, Chris. Chris, thank you for coming on the Hard Hat Talks podcast. I've enjoyed time. Hopefully the listeners have picked up on something that sits in parallel to the industry, but very important, because I think housing, whether it's new build or whether it's the letting, the tenant market, I think that it's very important to chat that through. So I'm delighted you could come and join us.
Pleasure. Yeah, and I was honoured to be invited along.
No problem. And good luck in 2026.
Thanks so much. You too.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to the Hard Hat Talks. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, whether you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your shows. That way, you'll be sure to never miss an episode. If you've got any feedback or a topic you want us to tackle, please drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. Till next time, stay safe, stay sharp, and keep your hard hat on.